just another minute because I see folks are still coming in. So it looks like things have slowed down a little bit. I imagine we'll have some additional attendees coming in as we go on, but I'll go ahead and get started because I want us to have lots of time for questions and discussion. So I want to welcome everyone to the March GenCen Colloquium. My name is Dr. Stephanie Nowen. I'm the director here at the Center for Gender and Global Context, and I'm also an associate professor in the Department of Sociology. And it is absolutely my pleasure to have Dr. LeConte Dill giving our March Colloquium. Before we begin, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to first thank Caitlin Vader, our office manager, who's got us all set up, and to let everybody know that Caitlin has part of the webinar registration. You'll be sent a link to fill out a Qualtrics survey that just asks you about the information that you got from this, how you found out about the colloquium. These kinds of things are really important for us to know how best to get the word out about our speakers and other events, and also to report metrics for how these colloquia are being used by our community. So please, I know nobody loves these surveys, but if you could give us some more information about yourselves and let us know what kinds of ways you expect to be using the content from the colloquia in your teaching or your research or your outreach, we would really appreciate that. And so it is, again, my pleasure to introduce Dr. LeConte Dill. Dr. Dill is a scholar, educator, and poet, born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. She earned her BA in sociology from Spelman College, where she was also a creative writing minor. Her Master of Public Health degree in community health sciences with a specialization in child and family health from UCLA, and her Doctor of Public Health degree from UC Berkeley. And she was a postdoctoral fellow in health policy in the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine. So really varied, I love this, really varied disciplinary background. Dr. Dill's scholarship is critically informed by years of working in partnership with youth and community organizers, health educators, and policy advocates at community-based organizations and public health departments on issues related to chronic disease prevention, violence intervention, and juvenile justice. For nearly a decade, Dr. Dill served on the faculty at several schools and programs of public health across the U.S. Currently, Dr. Dill is an associate professor in our very new African American and African Studies Department at Michigan State University, and is a research associate at the African Center for Migration and Society at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Guided by Black feminist epistemologies and using qualitative and arts-based research methods, Dr. Dill has a commitment towards transdisciplinary community accountable scholarship. Her work focuses on the safety, resilience, and wellness strategies of urban Black girls and other youth of color. Dr. Dill's scholarly and creative works have been published in a diverse array of spaces, such as the Du Bois Review, American Journal of Public Health, Journal of Adolescent Research, Journal of Poetry Therapy, Poetry Magazine, and the Feminist Wire. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Dill and her presentation, #BlackGirlBee, Cultivating Wellness Beyond Resilience.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the warm introduction and welcome. Thank you, Caitlin, for all your help getting to this opportunity. Thank you also, Raja Lakshmi, and everyone else who reached out to me early on. I had just come to the university in the fall, and people were already excited about my work and already engaging with it. So I'm excited for this afternoon to unpack some of the work that I've been involved in, share a little bit more about me, personally, professionally, scholarly, poetically, in all different kind of ways. Also, before we dive into it, I just want to shout out, I see, at least in the participant list, some of my squad members, as we call ourselves in AAAS, so thank you for coming. I saw the names of other friends and comrades across the university and new names of students, faculty, also maybe community members that I don't know, but look forward to getting to know. I like to start off my conversations actually how some people end. So usually folks leave their contact information at the end, but sometimes we miss that, right? In the hustle and bustle of wrapping up conversations, we miss that. And I want you to stay in contact with me. I want you to engage with me in further conversations and further art making and space building. And so feel free to reach out to me on my department email, check out my website. I'm on Twitter, and I engage in a praxis that I like to call #Crunk Public Health. You'll get to know a little bit why I do that. But if you feel inspired by this conversation and want to share your learnings with the digital space, feel free to use that hashtag in other digital spaces. So today, I'm going to walk us through some terminology or ways of saying that relate to Black girl beingness and Black girl wellness, ways of being, ontologies, ways, epistemology, so the ways that we know but also remember, methodology, so what we do, but how I like to approach it, the listening that I do as a scholar, and the documenting that I do as a worthy witness, ways of telling, just calling in some names. Dr. Bettina Love said that, you know, we're not creating findings. We're not finding out anything new about our participants, but we may have insights. So I'm going to share some ways that Black girls have told me about themselves and their comrades. And then I'm going to wrap up with ways of dreaming. In AAAS, we talk a lot about dreaming. As a Black girl woman, I do a lot of dreaming, but I'm going to try to wrap us up of how we can dream in scholarly and non-scholarly spaces in service of holding space for Black girls. So you saw in my title, the title of this conversation is #BlackGirlB. So I'm going to give some working definitions of how I think about Black girls, Black girl being, and also think about wellness. This is also informed not just as my own being, but also informed by the people that I've had the honor to be in community with. And so when I say Black, that may be people that identify as African descendant, or as Dr. Cynthia Dillard talks about, African ascendant. They may identify as African of the diaspora, Black, African American, Black American, West Indian, Caribbean, Afro-Latinx, Blackity Black, show enough Black, hella Black, and Black AF. And there are many other definitions, but that's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about Black girl being. I'm talking about those kind of Black girls. So girl, I'm taking this definition from comrades at Grantmakers for Girls of Color who put forth in some materials last year some possible working definitions of the word, of the identity, ideology, the expression of girl. Again, informed by people that identify as girls. So that can be trans, cis, gender expansive, non-binary, or any girl or femme identified person, and thinking about an age limit under the age of 25. But also there might be those of us who are above that age that still identify as a girl. So still remember our girlhoods, still imagine our girlhoods, and still identify with those girlhood selves. So anyone falling into those categories, but also possibly offering new definitions of those categories is who I'm talking about when I say Black girl or girl. So Black girl, I use it as one word. I'm informed by Dr. Robin Boylorn and also by Dr. Dominique Hill, who use explicitly in their scholarship, in their praxis, in their work with Black girls in communities, Black girl, one word. So rejecting the compartmentalization of Black girls' lives, of Black girls' stories and bodies, but also seeing the oneness of their, but I'm gonna also say our, because I'm identifying as a Black girl, the oneness of our identity, seeing Black girls as complex. So not separating the Black from the girl, right? Thinking about an intersectional lens. So Black girl, one word. And Black girl B, right? Black girl B is in the title. And so I've been thinking about this for the last 5 years or so around my scholarship. A lot of our research, particularly with young people, but not just with young people, often we are, and sometimes this is championed, right? We're called to do this by funders or by institutions, but we're called to often engage with folks who are either the most exceptional or the most depraved. And I really want to continue to situate myself in what Dr. Amy Cox talks about, that messy middle, what Octavia Rahim talks about, that liminal space of in the middle, and what I'm calling and what I've been thinking about during the last 5 years of just a beingness. So what about the Black girls that are just being, right? Maybe they're exceptional, maybe they have a lot of marginalization and a lot of vulnerability, but they still get up every day and get through life, right? And so what is that called? So Cardi B reminds us of the regular, the degular, and the smegular girl, right? But other ways that I'm thinking about what does it mean to just be, and these are not exclusive. There's other ways of being, and we're going to try to unpack that together, even in this virtual space today. So how do Black girls be girls? How do they be, as Alice Walker offers, how are they womanish? How do Black girls name themselves for themselves? How do Black girls be in their cities, in their neighborhoods, on their block, in their towns? How do Black girls play? Or how is play constrained? How do they resist just by playing? How do Black girls, I referred to the squad in AAAS, but how do Black girls also teach us how they are sisters, how they are squad? How do Black girls love, even though the world has taught us that we cannot love and we should not love, and who we can and cannot love? How do Black girls be present? How do Black girls be still? How do Black girls not just be hopeful, but hope-filled? How are Black girls already the future and think about the future, situate themselves in the future? How do Black girls be writing? I'm a Black girl poet, and I've been a Black girl writer before I was Dr. Dill, and I will continue to be. And so that's kind of some, or that's not kind of, that are some of the ways that I've been thinking about being. I see some things coming in the chat, and I do like, even in the virtual space, for things to be participatory. So if you have kudos, shout outs, questions, please put them in the chat. I won't be able to engage as I'm talking and as I'm navigating, but I would love to, after in the discussion, to engage with the love and the questions and the inquiry in the chat. So a lot of my work, particularly since my doctoral program and in the more of the decades since then, has been situated around the concept, the theory, but I would also say the praxis of resilience. So a lot of my work has been to champion that Black girls are not only victims, are not only at risk, but are resilient, are able to bounce back and able to get ahead, are able to thrive. But one of my colleagues, Karin Paul Dhaliwal, reminds us, particularly for youth of color, that Black girls been resilient. Resilience is not an outcome, is not a benchmark, it is a baseline. So I'm thinking about my work, even though I will be sharing my work over the last 10 to 15 years, where I was kind of situating myself in this resilience frame. I'm rethinking and reimagining that, like, we've been resilient. So my work is actually building upon that. We know that, what else is there, right? So wellness. So in my title, I talked about, or the title for this talk is about moving us beyond this resilience into wellness. So a lot of my thinking of the concept of wellness is initially situated, it's partly situated in my training in public health, which I'll go into, but it's really situated, again, with Black girls, Black women, Black feminists. So in the text, The Salt Eaters, Toni K. Bambara, through her rich characters, remind us, and she starts out the book literally after the intro pages of the credits of the title and the publisher. Page 3 in my text of the book, which is the first page of text, asks the question. It starts with a question, starts with a critical inquiry. Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? And you might have seen this quote in a meme on social media floating around. I think it's important to flip 2 pages later, page 5, which continues the question, but also positions us in a level of answering the question. So it goes on to say, just so you're sure, again, that you want to be well, sweetheart, some loving, some care, and ready to be healed, because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you're well. So again, a lot of my work has thought about just being as resistance, just being as a counter to the rest of the scholarship in my field. So that means wellness is this whole treasure trove of scholarship that has not been widely unpacked by public health scholars. But it has been unpacked by Black girls, Black women, Black feminists. And so we're going to look at this question, are we sure we want to be well? We're going to remember that wellness is no trifling matter. Remember the weight of wellness, but we're also going to carry that weight, and not alone, but together. So again, for wellness, I'm moving us beyond illness, beyond disease, beyond risk. Again, how I have been disciplinarily trained to only focus, only study, only measure illness, disease, and risk. I'm moving us beyond that. Black feminists and others remind us that the pursuit of wellness, so again, wholeness is no trifling matter, that this active pursuit is our responsibility, and we're actively pursuing our individual, but also our collective needs and desires. And thinking about wellness, much so how people think about health, is thinking about not just the physical, but the mental, the emotional, the spiritual safety. A lot of my work, Black girls have reminded me how they work to be safe, to stay safe, to be safe in the future. And then I'm landing more recently on thinking, asking questions, maybe measuring, but listening around how we can foster tenderness, love, and joy, and therefore, again, contribute to this concept of wellness. So I would say that I've come to know and remember Black girl wellness with my own Black girl self. And it came before I was calling myself a scholar, before I was surrounding myself with scholars. It came from South Central LA all day, from my home. And again, being raised by people that didn't identify as Black feminists, didn't identify as scholars, but they were my first teachers. And sometimes that teaching, most of the times that teaching was subconscious, was subtle, was just the everyday aesthetic in my mama's Oldsmobile, and then her Camry, in our home, on our bookshelf. And other times it wasn't more intentional. So the ways that my mother in particular, but I think my other family members and community would find, like, let's go to that Black bookstore. Let's go to this Black woman-owned gallery. Let's spend time in spaces that affirm our Blackness, but not just Blackness, our Black girlness. And so it's in the art of Varnette Honeywood that was in our homes before I saw her art on the show 227 or the Cosby Show. It was reading books where Black girls were protagonists, and again, not just as victims, but as, again, going through their daily round, being every day. It was seeing sisterhood and squatting, whether we doing hand games on my block or on the TV screen, Sealy and Nettie. It was thinking about growing up in South Central, which is and was the hood, and particularly the time I grew up in, had so much stigma, but also had so much dominating narratives around the way to be in the hood is to be male. And so I also, though, always saw girls in the hood who were demanding to be seen, whether they were whispering or yelling. So a lot of my ways of knowing is situated in that. But I also, as my bio states, have to give honor to Spelman College, where I went 3,000 miles away from home as an 18-year-old, and where everyone at Spelman, not just people that were majoring in women and gender studies, no matter your major, everyone was developing a lexicon, also developing a canon, an expanded canon of Black feminisms. And so we were understanding the African diaspora. We were trying on words like epistemology, which like practicing saying it and still practicing to this day, right? We were trying to understand pedagogy, not just as a word, but as a practice by the people that were in front of us and modeling that. And so it was during this time as a college student that I was able to grow, like I said, my own canon, that I married with this canon that I already had from home, from South Central, from the bookstores and the bookshelves and the art and the everydayness on the street in the hood with Black women, scholars, practitioners, activists who were also contending with some of the same questions, maybe albeit different spaces, not just South Central, globally even, but I was able to read their texts, but also see them, right? And so the folks that were living at the time that were not just Black and white photos were in our spaces at Spelman, we're in our lecture halls, we're in our auditoriums, either visiting or on faculty and building spaces. And so I was able to not just learn the word epistemology, but be able to understand that Black feminisms have created this body of epistemology from time past, the present, and into the future. And then Black girlhood studies has been a home for me, particularly to amplify and not erase Black girls within the praxis of Black feminisms. And so definitely give all honor and kudos to Dr. Joyce Ladner, whose book, Tomorrow's Tomorrow, came from her dissertation, her work in St. Louis with Black girls, her work as an urban ethnographer, so her work during the late 1960s. The book was published in 1971. And she's been in a couple of talks recently. I actually have, just a shout out to AAAS, we've created mixtapes or what we call sonic intros. And on my particular sonic introduction, I have an interview from Dr. Joyce Ladner where she's talking about her work. But she actually, after she published Tomorrow in 1971, she didn't read the book until only a few years ago. She was invited to New York City in 2016 for a Black girlhood symposium. And she realized then the impact of her more than 40 years of research. She didn't know that she had created this thing that many of us situate ourselves in now, calling Black girlhood studies. She didn't know that she had created part of the blueprint. She knows now, and she claims that space. And so definitely looking to her work as I was identifying as an urban ethnographer, also amplifying and centering Black girls. I had the honor and privilege of Dr. Nikki Jones being on my dissertation committee. Again, another Black feminist urban ethnographer who asked the important question in her book, Between Good and Ghetto, about what is the code of the street for Black girls? And so folks that are studying the urban may or may not be studying violence or violence prevention. There's been a bevy of work around, again, maleness, or being a boy, being a man, occupying space in community. But what about the girls? And Nikki literally asked that question, what about the girls? And so having her as a guide early on when I was a doctoral student was so important. not just to learn rigorous research methods, but to learn how to listen and how to document Black girls and Black girlhood. And then also I saw her how to be a Black woman, a Black feminist in the academy. There's many other Black girlhood studies scholars, some book covers on this page. I'm not going to go into them, and many are not here, right? And many Black girlhood studies scholars and activists and practitioners may not be on bookshelves, but are doing the work. But I want to shout out Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown, who is the chair of our squad in AAAS, whose important work with Black girls, for Black girls, in collectives of Black girls and Black women, particularly with Saving Our Lives, Hear Our Truths, has been also a touchstone for me, even before I came to AAAS. So when I was doing work and bringing Black feminisms and Black girlhood studies into the public health space, where these canons are not a given, Dr. Brown's work has, and her other squad's work, has been an important touchstone for me. I also want to amplify folks that I think that you should know and remember. And again, that phrasing, know and remember, also kudos to Soha, kudos to Ruth Nicole Brown, because we're not just knowing, it's not just epistemology if we think of ways of knowing, it's also who do we need to remember. And that remembering is important for me because it's like, oh, what have we forgotten? What have we maybe erased or not thought about consciously? And so how do we bring them back into the space, into the conversation? And when I was thinking about, I often share this slide in my more recent conversations, just got off the phone call with one of the people on the slides, but I want you to know and remember these folks, not as emerging scholars because they are currently in doctoral programs or just graduated. They're not emerging. They're not submerged, so it's not like people don't know about them, especially given their presence. They're in digital spaces, they're at conferences, they're in the hood, they're in community spaces. So I landed this week as I was finalizing these slides as urgent. So not emergent, not submerged, but urgent scholars of Black girl wellness that you should know. So Brittany Brathwaite, who's currently studying at SUNY Grad Center, Veronique Ignace, who's also at CUNY, but at the School of Public Health, Dr. Mercedes Dunn, who's currently at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Shauna K. Townsend, who's at Drexel, and Siobhan Sutton, who's at Northeastern. And so when I think about who else is doing health and wellness work with and for Black girls, these are the people that I go to. And yes, I've taught and mentored them, but they are the ones that are actively involved in the research that I look forward to reading and I look forward to citing, not look forward like in the future. They're doing it now. So look forward, like when I get off of this and I go to their websites, to their IG, to their papers in draft, to their stuff that was published, but maybe in the gray literature, these are the folks that I go to and that I suggest you do too. So the ways that I've listened and documented over the years, again, I am trained or identify as an ethnographer. And so I'm asking a lot of questions in community. Particularly, I have also done a lot of study in urban planning. Again, I grew up in the urban, but I wanted to understand how developers and planners and builders and politicians and other folks that are at these tables, how are they making decisions about the spaces that we find ourselves in? And so how does the built environment, but also our social environment, impact Black girls, Black girl thriving, Black girl wellness? But also how do institutions and communities, so youth centers, community centers, spaces of recreation, spaces of leisure, spaces that should be of leisure but have been foreclosed upon, spaces that have always been there but don't always get the big grants, how are they supporting Black girls and Black girl wellness? And then listening and documenting to Black girls themselves to tell us how they also, in addition to thinking about their spaces, their centers in their community, their literal spatial geography, how do they also rely on their own personal and maybe their own squad resources to be well, to cope, to reimagine, to recover, to restore. What does that look like? What are those practices? And so I do that, yes, as an ethnographer, but before I'm even doing an IRB approved interview or conducting a focus group, I'm doing what Dr. Keisha Green and Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs say. I'm doing a mash of what they do. So Dr. Keisha Green talks about being a double Dutch methodologist. And Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs talks about being a community accountable scholar. So for those of you that jumped double Dutch or remember jumping double Dutch or wanted to jump but weren't that good, or maybe have seen it on TV or a movie, Dr. Green talks about the double Dutch that some of us might do as scholars, thinking about the multiple roles that we conduct, particularly when you're thinking about work in community, with community, and more specifically with Black girls, right? So you're not just an interviewer, you're not just a principal investigator, you're not just, in the hallowed halls of academia. With some of this work, you might be, and then being accountable, not just engaged or based in the community, but accountable to what the community needs. You might be actually using some of your grant funds to purchase some food, and when conditions are safe, right, to bring them to the community meeting. You might be attending a block club meeting to get to know more about the neighborhood. You might be what happened at the end of my dissertation research. The young people that I was interviewing, they were like, oh, now you're our poetry workshop teacher, right? So you might be bringing on your other gifts, your other skills to the space, to what's needed. So again, playing that double Dutch. Sometimes you're turning rope, sometimes you're jumping, sometimes you're keeping the beat, sometimes you're singing the chants, right? That might be for young people, right? Writing letters of recommendation for college or for jobs. For an organization, a community-based organization, that might mean not just the 35-page peer-reviewed article that will come from the work, but right now, we need the literature review that you conducted, because we need that for our grant proposal that's coming up. Or what could be really useful is a policy brief that we can use to advocate to our city council or to our legislature. So a lot of my work before and during the academy was doing this work, but it deeply informs the way I conduct my work as a scholar practitioner. And then I'm doing the interview, right? Or I'm conducting the focus group. And this also has resulted in, I have some of my citations at the end of the presentation, so feel free to take the screenshot or whatever you need to continue to know and remember the work that I do. But also, as a poet, this work has also resulted in poetry chapbooks or poetry books that also could line the shelves, but in a different way than an academic article that might be behind a paywall. So how have young people also been co-scholars, co-artists with me? And I'm happy to share more about what that's looked like. So ways of telling, again, not findings, but insights that I gained. And again, I'm just gonna only give a snippet of my work over the last 12 years or so in different spaces across the US, but also internationally, what I learned from Black girls and how they remind us or tell me how they work to be well. So I'm going to take us to Oakland. And this was based on my dissertation research with a group of young people who attended the East Oakland Youth Development Center. And in my work that has come from this, I explicitly named the organization. I know there has been a tendency, particularly in a lot of ethnographic work, to use a synonym for spaces. I use synonyms for the young people I'm talking about, and usually they pick their own synonym. But for the spaces, the cities, the institutions, the organizations, I explicitly name them because I hope that my work has legs and has leverage, big P policy, little p policy for action in actual spaces. So we're not talking about a made up space, and we can do that too, right? We can do the speculative work, we can do the science fiction work related to Black girls as well. But my work to date has been literally these kids in Oakland, these kids in Atlanta, these kids in Brooklyn. And so we need to name the spaces if we're thinking about making actionable change. So the young people I worked with in Oakland attended a youth serving organization that's been around for almost 45 years called the East Oakland Youth Development Center. And they're in a neighborhood that is known, not just in the media, like not just in research, not just pejoratively, but even by them as the killing corridor. So although their center where they went for after school programming or for jobs or to use the gym or for college prep workshops, although that was a safe space and was honored as safe even by people that were engaged in gangs or in teams or cliques, although that was a safe space, they were very conscious that their neighborhoods that they were navigating were not safe. And so this one interlocutor, Lachey, she says she actually stays safe by going to school, staying in school, coming to work, basically having a full schedule to where I'm not just running the streets. So to her, running the streets put her at more danger, more risk for having an unsafe encounter. So for her, it was important to do a before school program, have a full day of school. In her case, she was in high school. She was 17 at the time that I interviewed her, but she also was taking college classes at the neighboring community college. So she has a full school day. She's taking extra classes at the community college. And then she goes to the youth center where she's engaged in programming, but she also has a job. So staying safe and then going home when it's dark at the end of the day. That's how she stays safe. So I think that gives us a lot of insight, a lot of work in public health. Again, my disciplinary home, or how I've been trained, is when we don't talk about safety, right? We don't talk about safety. We don't talk about wellness. We talk about violence. We talk about violence prevention, but young people have amplified safety. Like, what are the practices of safety? We're not preventing violence. Young people have reminded me that they work to manage violence and therefore to amplify safety. I asked similar questions when I traveled back to Atlanta, where I'd done my undergraduate studies for my postdoc. And in this case, young people were again telling me things about safety. I was actually involved in a community intervention where well-meaning funders, urban planners, physicians, public health practitioners, and educators wanted to not just prevent violence in communities, but also prevent obesity in communities. And it's not that the young people and their families didn't want to do those things, but they also were very conscious of the real life threats in their environment to health and safety and wellness. And particularly at this time in Atlanta, this was right after the national foreclosure crisis, but the neighborhood I was working with in Atlanta is known as the epicenter for the foreclosure crisis. So where every space in the US experienced foreclosures in 2009, 2010, this neighborhood in Atlanta, the Pittsburgh neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta, was experiencing the foreclosure crisis earlier, 2007, 2008. And so this house on the screen is not just how one house on the block looked, but how most houses in the block look. And the concept of the trap, so trap music, trap houses, trapping at the bando, is not just colloquialisms in hip hop or in popular culture. Literally, the trap house is a foreclosed house. So I was working with young people that were in some of the only houses left occupied in this neighborhood. And when they were asked by funders or evaluators or interventionists, how do you want to stay safe? Or how do you, well, they weren't asked that. I asked that, but when they were asked about preventing obesity and preventing violence in their neighborhood, they were literally like, I just want to be safe when I walk to school or when I walk home. And so, not that they didn't want to ride their bikes or take a leisurely stroll to school, but they were like, actually, it's more safe for me if I try to finagle a way home, if I ask mama and grandmama them, or my cousin or my friend. And there's more insights that they share even around gender. And so young boys were talking about it's not safe because the police are following us, which we know also happens to girls. But young girls were also saying it's not safe because we're being sexually harassed. And even they knew, and these were middle school youth, and some of their classmates had been sexually assaulted in trap houses, right? And so intervention be damned. Like, we're not having a walk to school intervention. We need to have back up and have broader conversations. In the article I published about this, I also talked about the schools being foreclosed upon. So not an official like wood on the windows, but many schools in Atlanta, like schools in Chicago, like schools in Philadelphia, maybe schools here in Michigan, were also being closed rapidly. And a lot of those closures were not based on any data or any metrics, based on politics and politricks. And so the school I actually was working with actually closed down a few months after data collection. And so what does it mean if maybe the school is a safe space? It's unsafe in the liminal in between school and home, but then my school's closed. So where are the safe spaces? So the young people I was working with in this work were actually mapping safe spaces in their community and unsafe spaces. And there were far more unsafe spaces, and the safe spaces were rapidly closing. The park, the gym, the school. I have active research partnerships, like my bio said, at Wits University, or the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And again, have learned so much from young people, older than the young people I was working with in Oakland and in Atlanta. But again, in thinking about that definition of girlhood, so younger than 25, so young adults who identified as queer and who were migrating to Johannesburg because they wanted to be safe as queer folks. They wanted to be out and proud. However, South Africa has a lot of xenophobic violence. And so although they could be safe as queer folks and in partnership, they were stigmatized against because they were not South African. And many of the people I was working with were migrating from Zimbabwe. And so this is actually a poem that Modise shared, and I'll just read it right now. The world went rough on me. They call names, bitch, slut, whore, Isatabani, but I didn't change. I am me and am happy to be me, and stronger day by day. Who are you to tell me what I am? If you don't like what you see, Fumakime. And the performative Fumakime was really important when Modise shared this poem that's basically an FU. So in this poem, she's telling, you know, who's been harassing her, right? Not just physically, but with their words, with their xenophobic stigmatization, FU, right? And I think it's an important part because you see this tension, but I think it's a reality in Black girlness and Black girl wellness of an acknowledgement of the oppression, right? Like they're calling me these slurs. They're maybe yelling this on the street. But there's this also what we were calling resilience, but I'm also trying to create some tension with that frame because Modise is like, but I'm me. She's not saying that that's okay. And she's not saying that like, I don't care, but I think it is important to amplify, I'm happy to be me, I am me, again, that beingness, that is also part of her resilience, and I would say part of her wellness strategies, her wellness praxis. So going from South Africa to Brooklyn, where I spent the last 8 years, and 4 of those 8 years was in deep community with young Black girls in high school, and had a lot of ethnographic insights, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll just share. Jay was 19 at the time when I interviewed her, and so she was actually a year out of high school. She was attending college and was a year out of the program where I met her. It was an in-school violence prevention program. Again, violence prevention keeps coming up because that's the frame that we tend to work with in public health. But as you see, I resist that because that's not really capturing all the work that we're doing with young people. So a year after being involved in the organization CAVI, which stands for Kings Against Violence Intervention, Jay is reflecting upon her high school years and her time in the program. So she says, then like coming to CAVI, I think that was the first time I cried. It was just like, I just finally got to release and be comfortable. They were actually really supportive. And in the they, she's talking about the different facilitators and volunteers and role models that are part of the program. After I did these interviews, I shared Jay and other interlocutors' transcripts with the current CAVI participants for their reflections, their reactions. And in this case, Needy, who was 15 at the time, responded to Jay, even though she didn't know Jay, but they went to the same high school. They were in the same program of CAVI. And she responds in a poem or a letter and an acknowledgement of like, I see you, sis. So dear Jay, you know the worth of yourself. Don't let nobody bring you down because you are good enough. So that affirmation, that I see you, sis, that hyping you up, you're worthy, that is what they're doing, even though they weren't in the same spaces, right? But they lived in the same neighborhoods, they went to the same schools. They also understood the Black girlness that they were encountering every day. So that is broad brushstrokes of the research that I've been engaged in since I was a doctoral student, to a postdoc, to this academic life. But I want to bring us or wrap us up in thinking about dreaming. Again, we talk a lot about dreaming in AAAS, do a lot, I think, about dreaming, but I want to invite others in some of that. And so precisely a lot of that dreaming has caused me to reimagine again, this is not resilience work, right? This is wellness work. And so in thinking about the articles I published, even the poems that I've helped people to co-produce, I'm also thinking about other points of data or other outcomes that have come from the work that don't always get amplified as data. And so thinking about the movements, the somatic practices that Black girls do, the emotions, like in Jay's sharing in the last slide, she was talking about she was able to cry. And so much space and time, particularly for Black girls and women, is about keeping it together, holding it inside. Don't be tough, don't be soft. And so she found a safe, soft landing place to cry. So thinking about emotions, not just tears, but also rage, thinking about the side eyes that Black girls do better than anyone else, thinking about the hashtags we have on digital spaces to, again, be visible, thinking about what I've engaged in a lot over the last few years, our breathing practices to ground ourselves and to release, thinking about that as data, as inquiry, as findings, as insights, also of ways of being well, as practices of wellness. So I want to not just show a picture of little LeConte, but invite you all in a short practice right now, where I will try to compile some of the practices that I've been playing with since I've gotten to MSU into this not just concept, but this praxis of Black girl wellness. So if you feel comfortable in playing with me, I invite you to close your eyes and notice your breath, meaning more intentionally breathe. So often in academic spaces, we're not told or reminded or conscious of our breath and of our breathing. Before you close your eyes, there was a picture on the screen of 12-year-old LeConte. So in this moment of breathing, I invite you to deepen your breath. So a deeper breath out and a deeper, longer breath in. Sorry, deeper breath in, deeper breath out. And think about your 12-year-old self. Breathe. Think about what you called your 12-year-old self. Your name, your nickname, perhaps it's a dead name now. Maybe it's what your family called you, but nobody else could call you that. The correct pronunciation of your name, if everyone did not see or say it as it should be said. Say hello to your 12-year-old self. What were you concerned about at 12? What were you excited about? Were you worried about? What consumed your thoughts? What made up your everyday? As you think, as you remember to breathe. Perhaps breathe deeply. That might not be just joyous. Yeah, I'm smiling in the picture, but there's a deeper story, right? If this evokes emotion, remember to breathe. Maybe you'll remember something that you thought you forgot. And now within the next few breaths, I want you to yourself to complete or fill in the blank. So again, I started out this conversation with how do Black girls just be, right? How do they be girl? How do they be womanish? How do they be thriving? How do they be going to school? How do they be going to work? So I want you to finish the sentence. The sentence is be blank. So I just want you to fill in the blank. So with your inhale, inhale be. Exhale whatever word you want it to be when you were 12, you were when you were 12, you wish you could have been when you were 12. Exhale that. So inhale be, exhale. Inhale be, exhale. Inhale be, exhale. Inhale be, exhale. Be dancing, be journaling, be confused, be ugly, be smiling, be shopping. Breathe. You can return breathing at your normal pace and rhythm. You can thank your 12-year-old self for being in community with you. When you're ready, you can flutter your eyes open and come back to this space, this conversation. If you have a notebook or your computer by you and you want to jot down, you just did a list poem, a B poem. Every line of your poem, whether you call yourself a poet or not, starts with the word be. It's a refrain, it's an anaphora, if you will, for the poets in the room. So write down your B poem that you just did while breathing and keep that for yourself. Not just a memory, but perhaps as a map for yourself, to yourself. And so that's what I've been kind of consumed with during my time at AAAS and at MSU, the invitation that I've gotten from my comrades in the department, but also from administrators here to think about and dream about what can this work be now, be in the future. And it's landed with these practices that we just practice right now. So it's definitely poetry. It's also mindfulness, so meditation, but meditation thinking about body, mind, soul, spirit. It's somatic, so we didn't really engage in somatics now, but it's definitely remembering movement. So if you could have a move for your 12-year-old self, what would it be? Whether you are a movement practitioner or not, mine would be this. That's my move. And so I am excited to spend more time thinking about what the Black Girl Wellness Humanities can be, not just for me, but for us here at MSU. Other spaces to imagine beingness, to practice wellness, to engage in critical scholarship, but also arts and movement and just breathing. I'm excited in our AAAS spaces that are being built. We'll have some spaces to do all of that. And I want to remind you that you can not just cite Black women, but cite this Black woman. And so if you want to read more about some of the things that I talked about today and read more about my engagements, more than the short excerpts that I shared, feel free to do so. And with that, I wanted to leave ample time to have a discussion, to unpack some of the things I said. I'm going to peek at the chat, and I'm excited for you guys to ask questions, for you to offer some of your own practices of wellness, of beingness, and I look forward to engaging with you in other virtual and in-person spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. LeConte, do you want to manage the Q&A yourself? Do you need me to help out at all?
If you can help out, just because I need to scroll up and get caught up. So if you can start.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if folks want to raise their hand, or you can put questions, comments in the chat as other folks have. Or the Q&A. I'm not sure that everybody sees, like all the attendees will see the Q&A, so, or the comments. Actually, they actually probably can.
The comments I'm seeing are just a lot of kudos. I know some people couldn't stay the full time, so I'm excited to engage with people after this. Just some reflections around again, resilience, not as a benchmark, but a baseline. Folks are making, or I see a comment around gentrification in communities. And again, this is being recorded, so you can refer back to the recording afterwards, or with your comrades that couldn't attend, feel free to share the recording when it's available.
Yes, and we'll send a link out to everybody, including those who registered, who sometimes you register for things and then realize you can't attend. So, this might be a really obvious question, LeConte. I don't know, but I think maybe there's a deeper answer than what I'm thinking about. So you bring to this understanding it more than just public health, right? And more than just violence prevention. You're really suggesting a kind of a form of a new epistemology. Maybe new isn't the right word, but a particular epistemology from the lens of Black girls. And I wonder what brought you to that decision to do that.
I'm just laughing because I'm like, I think the answer is simply, I mean, you said it might be simple or it might not be, but by being. And I don't know exactly how I felt the permission, not just throughout my life, but even in the academy to do this, but this is the only way I know how to be in the academy, one being transdisciplinary. So I did have quote unquote permission to take classes outside of public health, and then I did that rigorously, literally running across Berkeley's campus, but bringing those other theories and methodologies back to public health and like playing around with it. And so again, my training was rhetorically transdisciplinary. That's what they say on the website, and they were explicit about like not multidisciplinary, not interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary, meaning it is this newness. as you say, Stephanie, it is this reimagination. But in centering Black girls, you know, Black girls don't always get, again, the permission or the invitation to center themselves, ourselves. There's a new window sometimes around Black girlness or around autoethnography. And I've realized I've been doing that without calling it that. And so other Black girls remind me or give me the permission or give me the invitation to center them in this work. It's in the text, it's in textbooks, it's in theater, it's in our dance, it's in things that you can touch, but it's also in things that are abstract. And so in just being a scholar, like a rigorous scholar of Black girlhoods across disciplines, there's no choice for me but to center. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer. And just folks asking about the recording of the presentation, we will, once Caitlin has it up, we'll you know, put it on our website, but we'll also send a link to everybody who has registered, just so that those folks for sure will see that. But we and if you're not a subscriber to the GenCen newsletter, you know, send an email to gencen@msu.edu. I'll even put it right here in the chat, and just put a request in to get a hold of that. And we send it twice a month, I think. We try not to inundate people with emails, but there'll be some information about the recording in the next newsletter for sure. Oh, and you got a question from, I gotta put my...
Janina Strother, my comrade in AAAS, with the rich, robust, deep question. So I don't know if everyone can see it, as you said. So she thanks me, so thank you for thanking me for taking up this important work. In what ways do you feel as though Black girls are approaching wellness through practices that are similar and or different from their mothers, aunties, previous generations of Black women? Very good question, something I am deeply every day in inquiry about, but also practice. I mentioned Octavia Rahim. She's one of my yoga teachers. She practices restorative yoga and yoga nidra, and particularly holds space for Black girls and women. And in some recent practices with her, she and her teachers, so particularly one of her teacher mentors, Dr. Gail Parker, has invited me, my squad of restorative yoga practitioners to think about particularly where we learn rest. And then it was in a Zoom session, we were practicing yoga, but there was also some discussion, and we went into breakout rooms. And there were a lot of side eyes in the breakout rooms because we were like, we didn't learn rest as a learning, like from our families or communities or even school. Like, we learned how to work. But Octavia's recent book, just a plug, is called Pause, Rest, Be. It just came out in February. So in the pause, after the side eye, after like, we didn't learn this, right? So if you think about all the work, the important work on intergenerational trauma, if we just stay with the trauma and like, we only learned work, my mama worked, my auntie worked, so-and-so worked so hard, they died early, you might not pause and see the other part of that expansive answer. And for my personal, I'll just share for myself, in that literal recent pause practice, I remembered that Nana Dill wasn't calling it rest. Nana Dill wasn't actively engaging in restorative yoga. Nana Dill did get her nails done every 2 weeks on Crenshaw. But when I'm thinking not just rest, I also remember this really rich memory of how she engaged in sleep rituals or pre-sleep rituals for herself, but also for me as a little kid, my paternal grandmother. And I remember this rich, detailed, rigorous, these rituals of like how you prepare to sleep. Literally You think about preparing to take a bath. As a Black girl, you don't just jump in the bathtub, right? We got to do something, tie up our hair, twist up our hair, curl up our hair, put up on a scarf, put up on a bonnet, right? Think about how that is passed down, right? Not, again, not called rest, not called restoration, but that preparation. Think about the bath time. Think about after the bath, right? So the baby oil, maybe the powder when we didn't know it was toxic, maybe the Genate because we got the elders passing on this old folk stuff, but I'm gonna put on this splash of smell goods too. And then saying your prayers, maybe reading the book. And I had this whole memory that I had forgotten, not consciously forgotten, not subconsciously, but I also hadn't connected it to like my own practices or healing. So I would say, Janina, part of the answer, and I think the answer will be evolving, and I look forward to continuing to answer it with you, is that it's not necessarily, there are some different practices, right? From our mamas and our aunties and our nanas, but there's also practices that were passed down, but they weren't, right? They weren't called practices. They were not called wellness. They were not called rest. And maybe for some folks it was called rest, and like, let's amplify those folks. So you were practicing rest in 1960? Like, let's amplify that, Black girl, Black woman. But I feel like they were doing it, even if it was in snatches. Like, I'm not gonna have time for a retreat, but again, back to Nana Dill, I am gonna get on this bus and go to Vegas. And I'm gonna have fun with my own squad. I'm gonna gamble and get a little coin, and then I'm gonna come back to the work. And so thinking about those practices that are, again, this turnaround trip for those of us in LA, Vegas, 5 hours away, and people would literally go, stay for a few hours and come back. And so that's her little retreat, right? Maybe just a few hours, but that little retreat. So thank you for that question.
Are there any other questions or comments, or any engagement people want to reach out with right now? I never know how long in the Zoom environment to let the awkward silence lay, but I think this has been really incredible, and really appreciate your time, Dr. Dill, and welcome you to MSU.
Thank you.
We're really excited to have you and all of your colleagues at AAAS joining us. So thank you very, very much. And again, we will make a recording of this available. And yes, and we'll be sharing that with folks who I know wanted to come but couldn't make this particular time. And thank you all who attended and for your great questions and comments and your own reflections. And when you get that survey, please try to fill it out. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.